Good afternoon, everybody. Okay, thank you for being here. We are going to start our session 2. My name is Dr. Roni Reiter-Palmon. I am the moderator, so basically my job is to say, and here's the next talk, and get out of the way. We will have 5 talks, about 10 minutes each, and then we'll do a brief Q&A for 10 minutes at the end. So write down your questions. If we don't get to your question, then you know where to find these folks for the rest of the day, and you can do that. So thank you very much again for being here. This is our session 2 on the development of the future of workforce, which is very exciting to me. And we're going to start with our first presentation by Dr. Michelle Black from UNO and her colleagues.
Thank you, Roni. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Insight for asking us to present the research project and the results here for you today. My team and I have been working on this project for a little over 2 years, and the title, as you can see up there, is Training and Education Research and Implementation Strategies for the Homeland Security Intelligence Community, but we actually call this Project 10. So if you hear that, that's kind of our short name for this project. So over those 2 years, our team has included 3 interdisciplinary professors, 4 graduate students, and 3 undergraduate research students. We learned a lot as a research team in regards to this topic, but more importantly, the challenges faced by government when it comes to training and education. And what we'd like to do today is provide you with a little bit of how we approach the problem set, as well as some of the recommendations that we provided for our report. So being a former military professional and government civilian myself, I feel I understand some of the challenges that are faced when it comes to this subject. So we had a lot of workarounds when it came to possible lack of collecting the data we initially wanted. So we came with that mindset. Like I said, I'll be presenting year 1 for you today, and then my esteemed colleague, Dr. Deanna House, which is right up there, she's going to be presenting year 2 in the preceding panel, and that's more focused on technology. So let me explain a little bit about, basically, this is my one slide. I have a one slide. Let me explain a little bit about this project. And basically what we did is we wanted to evaluate the current trends in intelligence training and education workforce development community, but community-wide. So we didn't just look at specifically DHS, we looked at the intelligence community as the overall entity. We specifically examined the following questions, and you see them listed up here. What are the challenges, current trends, and best practices in the intelligence training and education? What are the core competencies identified by the IC? What specific core competencies must an intelligence analyst possess to be effective across multiple components for DHS? And lastly, how can these core competencies be integrated into training and education effectively? Now, you're going to notice me mention core competencies quite a bit here. And the reason is because early on in our research, we had a couple of interviews, and that guided those deeper questions and focused research questions, because we wanted to hear from not only the key stakeholders, but also the analysts on what are some of the most pressing challenges. So that's why the results will focus on core competencies. Now, I'm not really going to go too much into the methods, because if you read the report, it goes heavily into the research methods, but I do want to highlight a few things. We performed a multi-method analysis, meaning that we integrated different types of methods and specifically conducted interviews across the IC. We also collected lots of documents that had to do with both academic, but specifically looking at training and education requirements for government. Now, this has allowed us to identify where the overall IC community is in terms of identifying competencies. Because again, we wanted a benchmark. We wanted to see where everybody was at. And we have 7 findings. They're not listed right here, but I'm going to mention them because I think they're important to note. The 7 challenges we called challenge areas. And this came out of all the research we developed and interviews we conducted. Now, the first one is core competencies, but the other 7 should be noted. And I believe this is where additional research could be, you can dive into for additional research. But let me list them very quickly. The first one we found was that there was a lack of standardization across the DHS with core competencies, or what is also known as basic entry-level training and education for Intel analysts across all departments, organizations, and components. Now, this is 6 key skill areas that an analyst should know before assigned to their organization. The second main challenge that we identified during this research is specialized training. There was a difficulty to attend specialized training needed for an analyst to perform their job to enhance the skill of the analyst in a specific function. I'll get to why in just a second. Third is called balancing demands. It's difficult to balance the demands of training with operational needs. So this area, the challenge area, puts training at a disadvantage because having to compete with the needs of the customer or the agency's need and placing training usually second on the priority list. And I assume a lot of you can associate with that and understand that perspective. The fourth is training delivery. This is where delivery training to all components and organizations at DHS, including state and local and tribal, that there was a difficulty. And as a side note, this generally had to do with budget because there's a limited amount of budget for training needs. And then depending on where that training was, you'd have to pay for people to stay there overnight. And then of course, that was a challenge. The fifth one is communicating expectations. We've identified that there was a challenge in defining DHS training expectations across components and communicating those opportunities to the organization. So understanding when analysts can actually take specific courses. And then 6, joint curriculum. We understood that there was a challenge in developing joint curriculum and training because of the distinct nature of intelligence community and law enforcement, which is a distinct and unique relationship that DHS has. And the last one is that identity. We noticed that there was a challenge in collective identity due to the Title 50 and Title 80 training requirements. So with all these challenges, we only dug into the first one, which was core competencies. And we included a couple of recommendations, and I have them listed up here. The first is that the intelligence analysts working within DHS and its components should have 6 basic core competencies. And this is where our report sort of specifically outlines them. And we've listed them here. It's analytical writing, communication, critical thinking and reasoning methods, collaboration, project management, and basic technology. And we're going to dive in for year 2. We're going to dive in what does basic technology really mean. And so we did that deep dive that second year. So essentially, we're also saying it's desirable to have fundamental intelligence skills. So history of intelligence, understanding tradecraft, but having the 6 core competencies allows an analyst to show up at their job ready to start performing work. Now, if you can standardize these set of core competencies, this would help then integrate and be able to use intelligence and information in a timely manner. So what we did for the final work is we provided some actionable recommendations that could be implemented right away. Specifically, we standardized a core intelligence analyst competency matrix. And this is based off guiding documents already. So it's nothing that we created new, but we were able to streamline and say, this is what we hear you're saying. You can actually start implementing this. We also suggested that you integrate the core competency into the learning management system so that you can follow an analyst and understand that they have these skills, and then they can be able to integrate it and follow them within any component or agency. Also, engagement with the IC Centers of Excellence would help then craft those core competencies. So you have academic students coming out already with those skills, but based on what you're looking for. Because as we noticed, and we'll mention this in our year 2, is that many of the centers of excellence, the academic excellence, so the IC, one specifically, focus more on specialized skill, so not necessarily the core competencies. Also, providing mandatory competencies online courses during onboard training, we thought would be a great idea, because then actually what you're doing is during that onboarding process, you're giving them the training that they need. Some of the interviews that we conducted, most of the analysts were getting, when they would arrive to their position, they would get that training then. And basically, for our second year, our team will focus on the workforce process related to the impact of technology, strategic planning and programs, and management of information protection. This is where we then took the second year, and this is where Dr. House will comment and go into how then do we look at the basic technology. So the reason, and I'm going to end actually right here, is the reason is that we only looked at core competencies again was that we felt that there was more of a need to take a deeper dive into that specifically, but I wanted to make sure I listed all of the challenges that we collected during this entire process. So thank you for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or provide you with information on our research.
Thank you very much. And our next presenter is Erin Bass. I guess they switched the order of the slides on me. So Dr. Erin Bass, also from UNO.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see my name come up there either, but I'm really excited to talk about our project that we're actually doing here in the College of Business. I'm Erin Bass. I'm the PI on this project. With me today, I have Erin Miles, who is the co-PI, and then one of the faculty who is helping with our data analysis, Jessica Peregrine, is here also. So our project is titled Workforce and Professional Development Project, Building Capacity in HSE, which we use that acronym to describe the Homeland Security Enterprise, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that acronym. HSE focused business analysis application. Okay, so just to talk a little bit about our project, I think it has a pretty unique sample and a pretty unique intervention. So speaking about the sample, the participants in the project are people who have no interest in working for the HSE or DHS, or have no familiarity with DHS and what it does at all. So we're talking about business students who go into graduate programs, either our MBA or our Masters of Data Analytics programs. And when you think about the kind of person who goes into these programs, they're probably very high achieving. They probably are trying to advance their career, usually working in the private sector, some public sector, but I would say probably 90% of our students are working in the private sector. They already have jobs. So they already kind of have an idea of what their career trajectory looks like, right? Or at least for the next few years. Typically, they're going to a graduate program, either an MBA or Masters in Data Analytics, because they want to hone a particular skill that maybe they don't have, so leadership or project management. Or maybe it's that they feel like they are pretty competent in some skill, and particularly dealing with complex problems, but they want a credentialing mechanism to demonstrate that they're really good at that. So what I'm trying to say is these students tend to be pretty good at getting some kind of nebulous problem and trying to get dive deep into it and figure out how to solve it. So that's why it makes for a really good sample for us to understand how we can use those skills for HSE kind of problems. So the project focus is really using business school curriculum to develop student-centered projects that address real-time, real-world challenges for DHS end users. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But why are we doing this? Well, as I described, business students, they have unique knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? Then we believe that those KSAs, we call them, can be leveraged for careers in DHS or careers in the HSE. But they really lack that awareness of how they can apply those skills. So I'll give you an example. If I have an MBA student, they typically know pretty well how they can use their problem solving skills, maybe to, if they work for Union Pacific, which is a transportation and logistics railroad, right? Like they know how to use their knowledge, skills, and abilities to solve a problem that they're facing in their job at UP, but they don't necessarily see how those same KSAs would be relevant for DHS end user problems, right? And so that's really what this project is all about, is trying to help them see how their skills can translate, but also open their eyes that there are potentially opportunities for them in the HSE in terms of their careers. So the methodology that we use is end user client projects in the MBA capstone class and the data analytics courses. So the MBA capstone class, the students are given a project on night one from a real world client. So we use DHS end users as the client, and they come in on day one and they tell them, here's the problem that we need solved. And then the students are given 8 weeks to solve that problem. So the stakes are pretty high and they have to put their skills to use right away. Similarly, in the data analytics courses, those tend to be a little bit longer, so 16 weeks in length, and it's the same kind of thing. They're presented with some kind of DHS end user problem, and then they have to use their data analytics KSAs to be able to solve that problem for the end user. We've done a variety of projects for different DHS end users. So we've worked with CP3 on some projects. We've actually worked with Insight on some projects. We've worked with groups in ICE. So we've worked with different groups. And the fun thing is that really any kind of project fits, right? If it's anything to do with things that are happening within the actual client itself. So we've had like employment kind of projects, HR kind of projects, those ones, the business focus is pretty clear, but we've also had them take like their knowledge of supply chains that they develop in MBA and use that to identify weapons trade in Cameroon. And so the students, it's pretty cool. They'll take some kind of framework that they've learned from their supply chain class and apply it to this weapons trade in Cameroon project. So it's really interesting to see how they use this kind of different way to approach the problem. At the end of the course, so if it's the 8-week MBA or the 16-week data analytics, they will make a final report and presentation to the client. And so it's also really great for our students to have that chance to interact with the client over the course of the course itself, but also be able to present everything that they've accomplished over those 8 weeks or over those 16 weeks. So I guess this is my unofficial plug that if you have a project for one of these classes, we have classes starting in January and we will run them every semester, every fall and spring semester. We are currently in year 2. So I wanted to share with you some of the other outcomes that we've seen, because if you recall a few minutes ago when I started presenting, I said, this is a really unique sample of students who kind of don't know anything about the HSE or DHS or what it does. And I want to show you what this end user project intervention has really done for our students. Okay, so this is the first graph that I wanted to share with you. The blue is pre and the orange is post. So we thought it would be good to kind of capture what's actually happening in the frames of these students as they're going through these project-based courses. So we asked the students, rate your level of exposure to DHS and what DHS does. Okay, so you can see blue, most of our students had either were moderately familiar or less with what DHS does. By the end of those 8 weeks, most of the students were falling on the moderately familiar all the way to extremely familiar. And I can tell you the extremely familiar students were probably the ones who actually worked on the project for a DHS end user. But here's the cool thing. Over the course of the data analytics or the MBA courses, they're talking to the other students who are not working on those projects, right? Maybe they're doing a project for a different business. And so even those students who are not on a DHS end user project are still gaining familiarity with the HSE, which is a really kind of cool spillover effect that we have happening. The second question, oh, it didn't come up here. I don't know why that title didn't come up, but the second question that we asked them is, how interested would you be in a career in the HSE? And we have that broadly defined, right? Like that could be working for DHS, but maybe some of these students are interested in starting their own businesses. And so maybe they would be interested in starting some kind of government contracting business. And this was pretty wild to us too, right? So imagine that the text actually came over with the PowerPoint slide, but on the left-hand side where it says 0% is like not interested at all the way over to on this side where it's extremely interested. And so we see this very like non-normal graph where over the course of this time, it's really opening up students' eyes to the opportunities that are available to them in the HSE. And so that's really kind of an interesting finding for us as well. So I'll wrap it up there. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but also happy to share more of our projects that we do and see if maybe some of your projects might fit into our MBA or our data analytics classes here at UNL. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And next. Get some slides up. No, not yet.
Not me.
We're skipping you for a bit. But Dr. Frost, you will be next. So if you want to, in the meantime, come up here and we'll get your slides up in a second. Thank you.
Maybe while they're doing that, I'll just talk because I get maybe 3 minutes. Thank you very much for the privilege of being here. When the slide comes up, you'll see who I am and see who the better part of the team is. Coming from San Diego, it's an interesting thing to come to Omaha. Omaha has I grew up in South Dakota. So I'm way south of where I grew up. So this was the city that in growing up, this was the premier place you could come to in the entire region. And so I have been to Omaha a whole bunch of times, almost always with a trumpet with me because I came here to play concerts with Boys Town. But coming here, this was the place that was extraordinary to be able to come to this massive city. That was in 1960s. And it's changed a little bit. In having the slides there. First, great, super, thanks. The title of what it comes is data analytics, but in a Homeland Security degree program. The degree program is the Homeland Security graduate program at San Diego State. Lance Larson, who's sitting in the back with the red tie, is the co-director. So it's the person who right now in an extraordinary way, because everything is now electronic. Lance is an incredible electronic person. But what we're doing is trying to train people for the Homeland Security enterprise within what's also labeled as a minority serving institution. And if you're aware of San Diego State as a minority serving, we reflect the community that we're in, which the community very much is Hispanic, Latino. We have two campuses, the San Diego State campus, the one shown on the left, and then on the one on the right, a new Homeland Security program, which has started during Insight. That campus with a Homeland Security program there, and that's 90+% Latino. So as a place that we are deeply involved in the border and the things on the border, and in reflecting what takes place in that region, Homeland Security ends up being of extraordinary importance to our students and to other people because they see it's of extraordinary importance to the community. And so in teaching about Homeland Security, we have the privilege of being connected to a bunch of people who are coming in with the primary purpose of public service. And so they're coming into this degree program that they've chosen. Right now, we have between 100 and 120 students. We're reaching close to 1,000 graduates who have been through. And so in that, people coming in, this is what I want to do. I want to go into Homeland Security, and it's because I want to help solve problems that they're in a community that they really see why that makes a difference. As a way of looking at it, here just as a little test in a way, but probably something that most of you do almost every day anyway. So these are from Twitter. In doing that, this is looking at the official Defense Ministry of Ukraine categorization of the number of both people eliminated. So the top number, people eliminated, you could infer that killed, wounded, but people eliminated. And then very much down, you can see tanks, like 262 tanks, but in 1 month. So the 24th of February is when it started. So every 24th. So in this, in 8 months. So just look at the data analytics, how many tanks were killed in 1 month and how many people killed in 1 month. And then as you go down there, the place you absolutely don't want to be is in an armored personnel carrier. You look at that and go, dude, it's San Diego, dude, you are in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're going to be really dead. And as you go down there, look at how many planes are lost, helicopters. And so you're looking at multiple simultaneous things at the same time and reaching conclusions. And that's very much what Homeland Security is, and very much what we try to do in terms of training students is multiple simultaneous events. You're taking the data, you're looking at it, and then project, when will we cross over 100,000 people eliminated? And you can just go 8 months, so that was 3 days ago, and you're going sometime in January. And you're going, especially when you equate that to 48,000 people were killed in Vietnam. You're going, so the nature of how big this is and the nature of the Ukraine front is the same as going from San Diego to halfway across Texas. And so the comparison, the analytics, the data through time of looking at it. So this is something that in our classes we look at every week. And so the students get really familiar with how do you go get data, how do you look at it, and how do you make a decision? There's another one, sort of the same idea, but now looking at something that changes clearly every hour. So this is from earth.nullschool.net. So it's 40 to 45 NASA NOAA satellites put together, supercomputer centers doing the analysis and doing it. This is actually the air looking at the elevation of about 60,000 feet. So if there was a nuclear bomb that went off in a place called Kiev, if there was a nuclear bomb that went off there, where does the radiation go? And so this is the level at which the radiation, like for here from the Japanese nuclear accident that was there, when you look at where it's going. So a profound thing that you could say, if the Putin was rationally looking at what was taking place, and that's obviously not maybe an appropriate assumption, but if you're actually looking at this changes by the hour. And so oftentimes, if you blew something up in Kiev, the radiation is going to go to Moscow. And you're going, oh, so I don't want to blow it up today because I'm going to kill my folks. It's never going to go to Europe, hardly ever. But the place that if you just did a nuclear thing on the ground by looking at the data layers as you're going down, if you look at those layers, almost always the air or towards the ground, less than 20,000 feet, is going to go to Turkey and Iran. And you're going, okay, I got a problem here if Iran's giving me all these. So you start to look at, you have multiple layers changing through time. Where is it going to go? And if I blow a bomb up and I irradiate China, I've got more of a problem just killing a bunch of people. So by having the students look at that, you're looking at it and going, oh, they're looking at major data through time changes. I'm trying to make a decision and then predict where does it change because I see the pattern change. So like looking at the weather, there's this funny thing here, the leaves all got painted. Palm trees in San Diego never change color. And sort of unfamiliar with that. So the pattern of what you're familiar with, you can then predict. And so looking at this as this is just a screenshot, but from looking at it now, you could say that's nuclear terrorism and having this people look at what might take place, what decisions would I make? And then you can see it's going to China and from China to the US. And China to the US is a theme of a whole bunch of things, including one of the posters. Another thing, this is just a screenshot from Twitter, from some guy. And it's really looking at putting multiple data sets together. And that data set is looking at a fire that took place this September on the border. And you're going, well, it's just a fire. Well, fire in San Diego area is also used as an offensive weapon. But if you start a fire, what does Border Patrol do? They don't stand there and say, stop. They get out of there because it's not worth dying for. So a very normal thing that fires are started to get Border Patrol off the border so that then you can move drugs. And so you can start to look at that and going, okay, so do the people on the cartels, so they actually totally pay attention to this. So if we're looking at it, you can see the things that are red are satellite determinations of where there is fire, from which satellite at what time. And so you can look at what time during the day was the fire this big, where is it going to go? And then the black is fires that burned before. And so in a really simple way, big story here is it already burned before, it's not going to burn very fast. So almost immediately you can look at that plus the weather. So here's the weather that's about 15 seconds out of real time for hundreds of stations just in San Diego County. And from that, you can see the weather, the wind switches direction. That switch of direction ends up being the critical point of through time switched. And when it's switched, if you aren't ready for the switch, you may die. And so one of the biggest things for looking at this is data through time. When is it going to switch? Where do I need to be in 4 hours? So that actually equates to the Homeland Security enterprise in a profound way, because it's not just the snapshot of what's now, it's what can you do something about? And so by training people for doing that, just as a way, and then a really simple thing. So you made the web page, but then how do you get it to people? So that's why this is just a tweet. So how do you get it out to people? And then the interaction, and this now becomes the way of how you teach people how to do it. And in teaching them, this is now used in almost all the emergency operations centers, because actually we built the software in the back end too. So of looking at the same idea, don't go to Tijuana if you come to San Diego. These are the record of, this is just 1,500 homicides this year in Tijuana. So Tijuana has won the award of the most dangerous city for the last 5 years in the world. As you're looking at this, you could say, so here is spatial data of where there's a body. And you can see as an example, here's the body, here's another body, here's the data point, which is that data point. It's in Mexico. So a really powerful thing, it's done by journalists. So as journalists can only put some quality of data on the web, or you're going to be real dead. And so it's taking a particular kind of data that were published that's doing here, but you can look at this in a powerful way, the geospatial things like what Austin said this morning in some ways to make a decision. You could look at areas that are like here where there's no dead bodies right here. And you're going, oh, no big deal. They just didn't find, no, there's no dead bodies because that's where the tunnels are. And you don't dump a dead body on your front door where your tunnel is. And so interestingly, one of the most attractive ways to find the tunnels is where there's no bodies. And so you start to look at it in the geospatial relationship, what's there, and then going in. A really powerful part of what's not on this slide is there's only one blue color, but in only one blue color, Tijuana has 3 major cartels. The one that's the really noxious one, the new the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJNG, they just kill you. And so between them and Sinaloa, so you can say, wouldn't it be powerful if there were 2 colors here, Sinaloa and CJNG, and some then AFO? And wouldn't it be powerful if this was animated? Is it a back and forth, back and forth? So the sense of the geospatial making a decision from just looking at the data are all there, and students looking at it going, whoa, I could actually take that and make sense out of where it is, why it is. Another thing that jumps out at you when you look at the data, look at where all the places are, if you're familiar with Tijuana, where all the places are where the rich people live. There's no bodies. And so in a very powerful way, you can go, I own you, don't dump a body here. Totally straightforward. So of maybe last slide. Something that comes from China, that comes from Mexico, that's related in a profound way to all these things, that's the multiple simultaneous events taking place together, is something that now all of our students almost are working on, is fentanyl. So most of the fentanyl, way over half of the fentanyl that's thought to be coming into the United States is coming in through the San Diego ports of entry. And that must mean that it works. So as it comes in, if you actually look at what's taking place in San Diego, in 2016, we had 33 deaths. We had over 825. 825 is still preliminary. This in 2021, it will be over 1,000 this year. So you can look at that just from 2016 to 2021, there's a 2,300% increase. And so the analytics of that go way up. It actually gets way worse when you realize that, oh, this is the first year we've ever actually started measuring fentanyl in somebody's body that went into a hospital because it was never part of the blood test. And so the more you get into the data, you go, this is actually way worse. And there were more than 2,000 revivals. For San Diego, in Homeland Security, we don't map this at all. None of the, so like ODMAP or things, we're just starting to do that for where are they? What is, we work with HSI, DEA on this to go to people's homes. A lot of them are high school kids who took something, or younger people, and it's like Adderall, Xanax. What would happen if there was a nuclear explosion and people got anxious and they wanted to go get Xanax? And it's going to happen right away. You're going to go, oh, you may die of fentanyl before, well, it came from China anyway. But as you look at what's taking place, to focus the students, and that's really our primary PowerPoint is our students, is to look at what they're leaving in their brain, is a sense of how do I analyze data? How do I ask questions, and multiple questions at the same time, to try to look at, this is actually the experience of what's in Homeland Security. And most people find that incredibly invigorating. Because as a very simple thing that you could look at, maybe the thing that you can take home with you just down here in the bottom corner. If CBP was not on the border, both at the ports and in between, the amount of fentanyl that would be coming over would be probably astronomically more. And if there was way more, what would we be now experiencing? Like this last, and Jeff Vargas has a poster on that. If you look at how much more is it going to go? So 70,000 fentanyl deaths last year. And the sense of lots of places you don't even know it's fentanyl because it's not measured. In San Diego, in March, 20% of the people that died were under 5. And you're going, how can you have, they're under, because they found a little blue pill that came out of the boyfriend's pocket or something like that. They have a small body mass, and so they took it. Now the one that's really of concern is the rainbow fentanyl that's multiple colors. And you look at how many of you have ever taken a handful of M&Ms, taken one M&M out of the package and ate it, put the package down. In your life, have you ever done that? So what you do when you get a package of M&Ms, you put your hand out, you pour it in, and you take all of them. What if you did that for a pill that was not, by itself wouldn't kill you, especially if you're a child? You are dead. And so the sense of rainbow fentanyl, and since a lot of that seems to have originated coming from China, coming from Canada, China. So I'm looking at much of this kind of a problem, to being able to measure it through time, and then working with the medical examiner, working with the hospitals, public health community, we're able to have our students actually work on something, and they're going, this is important. And because of being important, of looking at the multiple simultaneous things, because they're also looking at the other, we're finding that invigorates them to want to go on, to actually, to want to go on to be in the Homeland Security enterprise. So thank you for, I'm sorry, I got carried away.
So the next presentation is by Dr. Matt Crane. Give us a moment to switch the slides, but you could come up here and tell us if you're from Albany or Albany.
Thank you very much. Can I just use my professor voice? Is that okay? Will they hear me on Zoom?
I think it's for.
Oh, okay. I'll use the microphone. Fine. Great. Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thanks for inviting us here. So my name is Matt Crane from the University of Albany School of Business. I'm presenting also on behalf of my co-PI, Neil Shortland, who is director of the Center of Terrorism Security Studies at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and our research assistant, Jen Mezapel. So our project is titled Psychological Trauma in Terrorism Research, Identifying Risk Factors and Intervention Points for Work-Related Psychological Trauma. I am, like Dr. Ligon, I'm an industrial organizational psychologist by training. I work in a business school. I think about business problems in general. One of those being, how do the structures of occupations place people's ethics, morals, values at risk? And how do those risks contribute to the experiences that they have with traumas in their lives? So when the funding opportunities came through for Insight and this focus on workforce of the future came about, this seemed like a really interesting area to put this into, because for all of you as terrorism researchers and scholars of targeted violence and things in these areas, you know that this is hard stuff. It's difficult content. You know, this is a population that works with really dark, difficult, traumatic material, you know, reading criminal complaints, watching beheading videos, right? Going through ISIS propaganda. All of these things can put, you know, difficult content in front of us as a concept that is inextricable from doing the work. There's not many occupations that are like that. And in conversations that I've had with people who have worked in this industry for a long time, over many, many years, when you ask people, you know, what interventions are there, or what conversations have you had about the role that trauma plays in your experience at work, the conversation is always, I've never had, what I get back is, I've never had that conversation. Nobody ever asked me that. It's actually, I was speaking to a graduate student about this project just a couple of weeks ago at Albany, who works in the criminal justice department. And we're talking about this project, and she said, you know, it's interesting you bring this up, because when I was doing research on the 7/7 attacks, that got me so concerned about that I've never taken public transit since then. She goes, I can't go on a train, I can't go on a bus. I'm constantly concerned that, you know, these things are because I have this experience. So this is really important, I think, you know, what these exposures are like, the impacts that those exposures have on the people who do this job. And, you know, despite this, we don't really think about terrorism research as an at-risk occupation. We think about academics who are stoic and steady and sitting in their offices doing their research and staying centered. And that's not really the experience I think that most people have had. So I'm bringing this, we rather are bringing this organizational science, you know, organizational psychology lens to this question. And what we're trying to do with this project is to identify the who, the why, and the how of terrorism research, right? Who actually does this job? Because if you also ask that question to terrorism researchers, right, what does it mean to be a terrorism researcher? What is the job? You'll get a really diverse, varied perspective on what that work is. There's no standardized language about what that means. And that's, you know, idiosyncratic. It depends on what groups you study, what your domain is, you know, what training philosophy you come from. But from an organizational psychology standpoint, it's very useful to have a common set of standards and language to think about when you try to categorize the structure and experiences of a job. So that's what we're trying to do here, right? It's two stages. It's trying to create a profile, a composite point of view about what it actually means to be a terrorism research professional, full stop, as an occupation. And then within that occupation, what are the structural risk factors that exist that place people's values, morals, ethics, and personal psychological well-being under threat? So the way to do this, we've decided, is through what organizational psychologists call job analysis. Job analysis is a very well-established, robust IO psychology and human resource management technique that we use to dive deep into the structure and attributes of jobs. We try to figure out what makes people likely to succeed on a job. What are the KSAs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that are absolutely essential to being successful on the job. What does the typical work activity look like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you want to get a good exposure to what job analysis outputs look like, there's a great website called ONET, which is an entire collection of completed job analyses where you can Google your own job and see what people think about what it actually takes to do your job and see how right they are. But this is a well-established technique. There's lots of literature on this. This is something we're very comfortable and familiar with in the organizational psychology domain. And we're trying to take this to this specific occupation, do a job analysis to identify, what doing terrorism research is as an occupation. And then, like I said, those risk factors for trauma. So the project at this stage looks like 3 phases, and these phases have already kicked off. The first phase is a broad kind of sweeping survey that we're sending out to people who are involved in this industry as terrorism researchers. This survey will include workplace value diagnostics, right? Instruments we use to kind of get a general sense of people's perspectives of the role of their values at work, as well as the structure of the work that they do and individual difference variables and things like that. Some of you in this room may have received an email either from myself or from my research assistant, Jen Mezapel, asking if you would be interested in participating in this. We used EnSight's network to try to, get people who are interested. If you haven't received an email from me, but you think you might be a good candidate, this is a plug for you to come and talk to me after the talk or later in the conference and give me your information. We'd be happy to bring you in. So we're going to take that initial survey data and use it to inform the final build out of a very deep interview protocol. And then we're going to go and do on-site interviews with terrorism researchers across the world. We were fortunate in that during our proposal, we had 6 partner institutions write us letters of support who are willing to have us go on site and spend time shadowing and interviewing the people that they work with. And we're going to get deep into, how people view the jobs that they do from a subject matter expert perspective, as well as, how do they encounter and experience traumatic content, right? How often are you, leaving your workplace feeling drained or depleted because you've faced something difficult? How often do you have experienced work-life spillover, right? Where the experiences that you've had in your occupation, the stuff you've dealt with that day has contributed to your mood or attitudes or behavior at home or the next day or the next week, right? Or your interactions you have with people in the future. We want to take the qualitative information from that research, bring it back together, aggregate it with that empirical data we had from the first survey, and then we're going to kind of do the survey again, right? We're going to confirm that information we got with the same population that we had previously, and get that information together. So the idea is to build this grounded theory model of what it is to be a terrorism researcher, as well as the likely structural and interpersonal risk factors for these value violations, these transgressions, these potential causes of psychological trauma. The kind of long-term reason for that is because we are hoping, if we're able to secure some follow-on funding, we'd like to take that model and use it to then inform a robust experience sampling method that we will roll out with lots of people who work in this field and try to track their experience and exposure with these risk factors over time and see, for example, within day, between week, over time, how often are you having these experiences? How traumatic are they? Do they lead to long-term consequences like burnout, turnover and tension, absenteeism, depression, alcohol abuse? All of these really significant personal outcomes that will come directly from these experiences at work, but we don't talk about them directly and we don't know where the points for intervention should be. So that's what we're looking like. This is our milestones so far in our medium range plan. So we've developed that survey. We put our job analysis method in front of IO psychologists. I'm very fortunate at the University of Albany. We have a very robust IO psychology program at Albany. So my research team, we put this in front of a bunch of IO psychology selection and assessment experts and said, poke holes in this. Tell us where we're wrong. Tell us where we're getting the method wrong, and help us make it better. And they did. And so we're really on good footing there. Our participant recruitment is open currently for the survey, and we're hoping to launch that within the next week or two, and then spring participants on-site interviews and building qualitative data. So we are well on our way, and hopefully you find it interesting, and I welcome your questions as we go. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And last, but not least.
Hi, so thank you all for having myself here. My co-PI, Dr. Young, wasn't able to be here this week, but he does send his regards. So our study is a really great dovetail with Matt's work because we're looking at vicarious trauma among counterterrorism practitioners, whereas he's looking at researchers. So generally, the question that was really driving the work that we are doing is trying to understand how counterterrorism practitioners are affected by exposure to violent material. And I want to take a quick second and try to explain who these counterterrorism practitioners we are sort of seeking. For example, we have one of our students, let's call her Michelle, who went on to work with the DIA. And her portfolio or her work, she tends to focus more on Latin America, and she is doing a lot of project reports looking at violent groups that operate there. We have another student, let's call him Eric, for example, who went on to work with the FBI, and he looks more on domestic extremists and also looking at potential external threats emerging from outside of the United States. We have another student, for example, who went on to another different agency, but her work tends to involve travel to locations that are generally considered to be at risk, right? So these are active conflict locations. So these are the type of individuals that we're sort of interested in. We want to figure out generally how is exposure to different levels of violent material affect their resilience within the counterterrorism workforce. And what we realize is that we just really don't have much answers to this. We look at the counseling literature, and when you do so, what you find is that a lot of the literature coming out of there suggests that direct exposure or even vicarious exposure to violence can actually lead to vicarious trauma down the line. And so then we realize that, okay, we want to be able to broadly develop a baseline understanding of how counterterrorism practitioners are affected by exposure to violence, but also do more than this. We want to understand the implications this has for workforce resilience in the long term, right? We want to also be able to perhaps come up with some sort of tools that we can use to be able to mitigate the potential harmful impacts that this exposure could have on the counterterrorism workforce. In terms of the methods that we chose to use, we decided to use a mixed methods approach. So much like Matt is doing, we'll be conducting a survey. And the survey is where we're going to draw most of our quantitative study findings. But what's interesting, and I'm sure that you already can imagine, is how can we get access to these populations, right? This can be very, very difficult to do. So what we've done is that we've partnered with individuals from the McCain Institute. They have a violence practitioner network. And we are hoping to get a sample size of about 1,000 participants in the study. And so they've been gracious enough to say that we can be able to disseminate our survey through their network. We're also working with some of the existing partnerships that we have developed. American universities right down the street from the Department of Homeland Security, and we're sort of leveraging those pre-existing contacts that we have. Another approach that we are going to be using is going through survey firms. Some of these survey firms can be able to allow us to recruit certain participants. But of course, we're open. So if you think that this is a line of work that or research proposal that you think is open, and you think that you can be able to connect us with individuals who can be able to participate in the survey, we're very much open to it. You can reach out to me, and we can be able to get that ball rolling. A point that I also want to really hit home with the survey is that we are working with licensed clinical counselors who are being able to pre-test our measures so that we can make sure that they're robust enough. We've even gotten to the point where we're pre-testing the measures to make sure that there's no identifiable information that will be collected, so that we can really be able to get at what we truly care about, which is sort of how does exposure affect the resilience of the workforce. So we won't be collecting any personal information with the data. Another aspect of our work is the qualitative aspect of this. Now, this is what we intend to do, is to have focus groups as well as interviews where possible. And so this will be used as a complement to some of the quantitative work that we find, some of those relationships we may find within the data. What we're hoping is that the qualitative bit can be able to elucidate a bit more on the causal mechanisms that are sort of underlying some of the relationships that we're seeing within the data. In terms of anticipated impact, we have 4 that we're truly interested in. The first is to be able to leverage the results of both our surveys and the interviews to be able to say something meaningful towards policy and practitioners about how we can be able to build resilience to mental health strains within the counterterrorism workforce. The second anticipated impact is to be able to improve scholarly understanding of the mental health challenges that the CT practitioners face. And mostly we do this through our publications. We really started with a systematic literature review using PRISMA standards, which is apparently not gold standard of doing systematic reviews of the literature so that we can be able to understand what do we know so far? What do we know from counseling and other different fields of study to be able to tell us about how exposure to violent material can affect the resilience of counterterrorism practitioners. Third anticipated impact is we want to be able to advance both policy and academic knowledge on the impact exposure to violent materials have on human resources. And we'll do this not only from our academic publication, but also some of the reports that will come out of our analysis of the data that we do collect. Actually, how do you go back? Forgive me. There, thank you. An anticipated impact that I didn't include here, but one that we truly care about is be able to expand what we find beyond just the population that we're interested in, and also to leverage what is already existing in other parts of the world and bring it into our understanding here. So for example, we've built partnerships with the University of Birmingham out in the United Kingdom, who's doing very similar work trying to build resilience, but within generally broadly the criminal justice sector. And we're trying to leverage our measures to make sure that we have comparable measures so that we can be able to compare our results across different population types and try to learn from each other a little bit more. So that's another big potential impact. I'll end with our milestones and deliverables. Generally, we have this sampling frame that we have been putting together. And this just involves mostly being able to recruit participants to the McCain Institute. Again, recruit through our pre-existing contacts with DHS, and then hopefully be able to expand that out. If anybody else believes that they can be able to provide us sudden access, we'll be more than happy to work with you. The second is to develop and refine the survey instrument. Right now, the survey is developed. It's gone through the first round of pre-testing. We've gotten incredible feedback, especially from our licensed clinician who's on the project so that he can give us some great feedback so we can edit our measures around. We are right now dispersing it within the survey, the conference center. So if anybody wants to take part in the survey and give us feedback, we'd be more than happy to share that with you. I will also say that we're very interested in measuring the degree of exposure, right? So we're interested not just on how much exposure you have, but the type and the degree of exposure. So are you traveling to a region that is considered to have high risk of violence versus somebody who's working with a data set versus somebody who's working with reports versus somebody who potentially is having direct interaction with survivors of different attacks. So that's generally what we're really trying to suss out in our measures. And then we want to see if the flow of the survey is really, meaningful and at least not necessarily losing people out of the survey. So please reach out to me if you'd like to participate. And the other aspects that we hope to get through is sort of finish the survey and present our results at the annual International Studies meeting that is happening in April. And we'll also provide a report with methods and completed survey instruments in May of 2023. So I'll leave it there. Again, that's my email, and that's Dr. Young's email. Please reach out to me if one, you think you would like to participate and pre-test our measures with us, or two, if you think that there's potential within whatever department that you're working with to give us access to participants. Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. And unfortunately, we don't have time for questions, but I'm sure all of the presenters will be happy to chat with you during our break.